Rachel Monroe moved down the aisle with the kind of quiet presence people rarely noticed. Her hoodie was faded, cuffs frayed from years of wear, and the backpack slung over her shoulder had patches so worn they looked like shadows. The boarding pass in her hand read 12F, a window seat at the back. To everyone else, it was just another seat. To Rachel, it was a place to disappear. The cabin buzzed with a particular kind of energy, business-class confidence mixed with entitlement. Men in pressed suits leaned over the aisle, boasting about contracts and mergers. Women in designer coats scrolled through phones, their laughter clipped and sharp. Nobody looked twice at the woman in sneakers and a hoodie, nobody except to smirk. "Looks like someone missed the bus to college," a man in a pinstripe whispered, not caring if she heard. His Rolex caught the cabin light as he smirked at his seatmate. Rachel didn't slow. She'd long learned the art of silence. Each step was measured, steady, deliberate, as if the aisle was a runway only she could see. She reached 12F, slid into the seat, and tucked her backpack beneath the chair in front. Her movements were calm, unhurried, as though every gesture was under control. The man beside her shifted, his cologne thick and expensive. He gave her a once-over, then turned back to his tablet, lips curling in mild disgust. "Unbelievable," he muttered, just loud enough. Rachel pulled her hood slightly tighter, not to hide, but to anchor herself. Her fingers brushed the worn strap of her backpack, finding the small patch stitched near the bottom corner, a faded eagle, its edges frayed. She touched it once, lightly, then folded her hands in her lap. The first wave of dismissals came quickly. The head flight attendant, Olivia Hart, stood at the front of the cabin with a smile polished sharp enough to cut glass. She was immaculate, uniform crisp, hairpinned, voice firm. She glanced at Rachel's boarding pass when she'd entered, and hadn't softened since. "Economy's in the back," she'd said, her tone dipped in disdain. When Rachel calmly explained the flight was full, Olivia's lips pursed, but she didn't argue. She simply moved on, her heels clicking against the floor, drawing chuckles from nearby passengers. Rachel sat, her eyes steady on the oval window. Clouds shifted in the fading light as the engines rumbled beneath her. But the quiet didn't last long. Jessica Lang, polished and practiced in her sleek black dress, leaned forward from the row behind. "Must be exciting for you," she said sweetly, eyes scanning Rachel's hoodie. "First time in business class?" Heads turned. A ripple of laughter threaded through the rows. Rachel turned slowly, her gaze meeting Jessica's for the briefest second. Her voice was even, flat, but carried weight. "It's just a flight." The smile faltered on Jessica's face. She leaned back, flipping her hair as though brushing away something unpleasant. The others smirked, satisfied enough, but Rachel's calm had unsettled her. Meal service brought its own kind of cruelty. Olivia returned, tray of menus in hand. She distributed them with careful smiles to Richard Hale in his tailored suit, to Tara Wells with her glossy nails, to every premium passenger. When she reached Rachel's row, her eyes lingered on the frayed hoodie before she handed the menu to Richard instead. "I'm sorry," Olivia said loudly, just enough for nearby ears. "Menus are only for our premium guests." The man across the aisle chuckled. "Don't worry," he said to no one in particular. "She probably lives on fast food anyway." Laughter again. Rachel's hand tightened briefly on her water bottle before she looked up at Olivia. Her voice was soft, steady, impossible to ignore. "Water's fine. If you've ever been ignored, laughed at, or told you didn't belong, this story is for you. Drop a comment below. Tell me where you're watching from. Hit like if you felt that moment when the F-22s fell into formation, and subscribe if you want more stories that remind us silence isn't weakness. Sometimes it's the loudest strength of all." Olivia blinked, caught off guard, before moving on quickly, heels tapping faster than before. The chuckles lingered, but Rachel didn't look at them. She simply twisted the bottle cap with precise care, then set it down again. The insults rolled through the hours like turbulence. Don't sit near the exit row, she'll panic. Maybe she got a discount ticket. She doesn't belong here. Each one chipped at the air, filling the cabin with a smugness only the entitled could create. Rachel met none of it. Her gaze stayed on the horizon, the clouds passing in silent formation, her posture calm. But in her lap, her fingers tapped once against the armrest, controlled, deliberate, as though reminding herself of something the rest could never understand. The captain's voice crackled through the intercom. "Ladies and gentlemen, we'll be making a quick stop at Andrews Air Force Base for refueling. Please remain seated." At that, Rachel's head lifted slightly. Her eyes sharpened, gaze fixed on the window as the faint outline of the military runway came into view. Sleek jets gleamed in the distance, lined like silent guardians against the tarmac. Her fingers brushed the eagle patch on her backpack again, a subtle, almost reverent motion. Olivia noticed. "Something catch your eye?" she asked, suspicion dripping in her tone. Rachel didn't answer. She didn't need to. The faintest smile tugged at her lips. Not pride, not arrogance, just memory. The cabin laughed again at a fresh remark about wannabe pilots, but their words didn't touch her. Not this time. Because Rachel knew something none of them could imagine. Seat 12F wasn't just another seat. And soon, the cabin would find out exactly why. The engines hummed steady as the aircraft descended toward Andrews. Outside the oval window, the sharp geometry of a military base unfolded, long gray runways stretching like scars across the earth, rows of F-22 Raptors standing nose to nose, silent and predatory in the sunlight. Rachel's eyes lingered, her posture shifting just slightly, a subtle tightening only someone trained would recognize. But inside the cabin, the world was still small, still cruel. Richard Hale leaned over to his companion, voice pitched high enough to carry. "Bet she thinks those jets are cool. Shame she'll never be close to one." His laugh was a dry bark, echoed by a couple of others who thrived on his attention. Rachel's fingers brushed the rim of her water bottle again, her movements deliberate, her gaze never leaving the window. She didn't blink at his words. The plane eased onto the tarmac. Passengers straightened jackets, smoothed skirts, adjusted ties. They prepared as if stepping into a boardroom rather than pausing for fuel. The flight attendant's polished voice slid through the intercom. "A few premium passengers have been invited to meet the F-22 pilots during this stop. Please remain seated unless called." Her eyes found Rachel in 12F. The unspoken message was clear. Not you. Jessica Lang leaned toward Tara Wells across the aisle, her whisper loud enough to be heard by half the cabin. "Can you imagine? A picture with her in the background? The pilots would think it's charity work." Their laughter rang sharp, bouncing off leather headrests. Rachel didn't turn. She tugged her hoodie sleeves down over her wrists, grounding herself with the fabric. Then her hand brushed her backpack again, the frayed eagle patch hidden near the bottom edge. A flash of memory sparked, afterburners in the night sky, tracer fire like shooting stars, the scream of a radio barely cutting through chaos. She blinked once and the moment was gone, swallowed by the quiet roar of the cabin. The commander entered before the passengers' laughter had faded. Boots heavy against the floor, uniform crisp, his presence rolled through the cabin like a storm front. Major Kyle Bennett, late 30s, eyes sharp enough to cut through steel. He nodded politely at Richard Hale, shook hands with Tara Wells, offered quick courtesies to Jessica Lang. All routine, all expected. And then, his gaze stopped. The air seemed to still. Rachel raised her eyes, calm, steady, as though she had been expecting him. For a heartbeat, no one else existed. Are you Shadowhawk 12? Bennett's voice was low, reverent, but loud enough for the nearest rows to hear. Richard chuckled, assuming it a joke. Shadowhawk? What is this, Comic-Con? A ripple of amusement spread again, but Bennett didn't look away. His jaw clenched, his shoulders squared. Then his next words carried through the entire cabin. My apologies for having you sit here, ma'am. You're invited to the tarmac immediately. The cabin froze. Olivia's smile faltered. Richard's laugh died in his throat. Jessica's hand stilled halfway through flipping her hair. Rachel stood without hurry, sliding her backpack onto one shoulder. Her movements were smooth, precise, muscle memory from years no one here could fathom. She didn't look left or right, didn't acknowledge the shock spreading like fire down the aisle. She simply stepped into the space Bennett had cleared for her. As she moved forward, a man in a navy suit rose abruptly, voice pitched to the crowd. There must be a mistake. She doesn't look like anyone important. He gestured with his cuff-linked wrist, certain others would agree. Rachel paused just long enough to glance at him. Her eyes steady, her voice soft, sharp as glass. Looks can be deceiving. The man's face flushed. His mouth opened, then closed. He sank back into his seat. Bennett's eyes never left him, a silent warning flashing like a blade unsheathed. Then he turned and guided Rachel forward. Outside, the air was raw with jet fuel and wind. The sun glinted off canopies and razor-thin wings. A line of F-22 pilots stood at perfect attention, their boots aligned, their faces unreadable. Bennett's voice cut sharp across the tarmac. Attention! This is Shadowhawk 12, call sign Midnight Viper, the one who led 3 squadrons through enemy skies. Every pilot snapped to attention. Salutes rose in perfect unison, crisp as the jets behind them. Rachel returned the salute with the same precision, her expression calm but warm. For the first time, a small smile tugged at her lips. From inside the cabin, pressed faces crowded the windows. The same passengers who had mocked her minutes before now stared in stunned silence. Phones hovered, forgotten, fingers frozen mid-scroll. Rachel's shoulders eased just slightly, as though in this roar of respect she'd finally stepped home. The line of F-22 pilots did not waver. Their salutes were iron, their eyes forward, but every heartbeat belonged to the woman who had just stepped from the shadows of 12F into the searing light of the tarmac. Rachel Monroe, known to them by a name whispered only in mission debriefs and flight records sealed from public view, stood steady in her worn hoodie, the frayed cuffs barely moving in the wind. Major Bennett's voice carried again, not for her this time, but for those watching. This is Midnight Viper, the pilot who once led 3 squadrons home through skies filled with fire. Inside the cabin, disbelief cracked into silence. Richard Hale sat frozen, drink halfway to his lips. Tara Wells clutched her phone but didn't dare raise it to record. Jessica Lang's smile had evaporated, replaced by something closer to fear. Rachel didn't seek their eyes. Her gaze was on the pilots, men and women in crisp uniforms who had once followed her voice through chaos. She lifted her hand, returned their salute with flawless precision, and for a moment, just a moment, the weight of years fell away. A young officer stepped forward, helmet cradled in his arms. It was worn, scarred by hours no civilian would ever understand, but the embroidered call sign was unmistakable. Midnight Viper. Bennett took it, then turned to Rachel. This belongs to you. No one else has earned it. The cabin erupted in whispers, voices rising in disbelief. A stunt, a story, a mistake. But every word died when Rachel took the helmet in her hands. Her fingers brushed the stitching with reverence, as though greeting an old friend. Then, without hesitation, she slid it over her head. It fit as though it had been waiting for her. The wind whipped around her, tugging at her hoodie, but Rachel stood taller now, shoulders squared, chin lifted. The helmet transformed her, not into someone new, but into who she had always been beneath the quiet. One by one, the pilots straightened, their expressions shifting. Awe, respect, recognition. A lieutenant barely past his 20s stepped out of formation, voice low but trembling. "She's the one who saved my squadron." His words carried across the tarmac like a confession. The others followed his gaze, their rigid faces softening into something like reverence. From the cabin windows, passengers pressed closer. Tara Wells lowered her phone, the record light blinking uselessly. Richard Hale muttered, "Impossible," but his voice shook. Olivia, the flight attendant who had smiled only for the powerful, gripped her tray until her knuckles whitened. And then came the sound. A low, rolling thunder that built into a roar. 2 Raptors broke formation and lifted from the runway, their wings slidesone, icing the sky as they arced into position alongside the civilian jet. The roar rattled the cabin walls, silenced the chatter. Bennett pressed a radio into Rachel's hands. His words were steady, but the weight behind them made the moment almost holy. "They're waiting for you." Rachel slipped the headset on. For the first time since boarding, her lips curved into a smile. Not mocking, not proud, but alive. "Hold formation, Eagle One," she said, her voice calm, certain, carrying through the radio like it had countless times before. The response was immediate. A chorus of voices, sharp and unified. "Yes, ma'am." The cabin gasped. Men who had sneered hours ago now sat frozen, jaws slack, as the roar of America's most advanced fighters bent to the command of the woman they had dismissed. Jessica Lange covered her mouth, her eyes wide, the polished mask finally broken. Richard's tablet slipped from his hands, clattering to the floor. No one moved to pick it up. Outside, the Raptors held their formation tight, wings gleaming in the sunlight. They weren't just escorting a plane anymore. They were honoring a commander. Rachel lowered the headset slowly, her hand brushing the eagle patch on her backpack as she did. For a heartbeat, she stood between 2 worlds, the quiet of the cabin behind her and the thunder of the tarmac before her. Bennett's gaze lingered, filled with something unspoken. Pride, gratitude. A soldier's respect for another who had carried more weight than most would ever know. Rachel exhaled, long and steady. Her shoulders eased, but her eyes stayed sharp. She returned the radio, tucked the helmet beneath her arm, and stepped back toward the cabin door. Every face inside turned as she entered. Silence reigned, heavy and unbroken, as though the very air had changed. No one dared whisper now. Rachel walked the narrow aisle back to 12F, her steps unhurried. Her presence no longer invisible. The same hoodie, the same backpack, the same seat. But the world around her had shifted. For the first time, passengers looked at her not as someone who didn't belong, but as someone they could never hope to match. The cabin was no longer the same place it had been when Rachel first boarded. Hours ago, it had hummed with arrogance, filled with whispers and laughter at her expense. Now it sat heavy, charged with a silence no one dared break. Rachel eased back into seat 12F, helmet resting on her lap, backpack tucked beneath her feet. She didn't look around. She didn't need to. The weight of every stare pressed against her, but her eyes stayed on the window where the F-22s still glinted in tight formation, escorting the plane like silent guardians. Olivia Hart cleared her throat near the galley, forcing a smile that cracked at the edges. "Well, it's nice to have a special guest on board," she managed, her voice brittle. Her gaze flicked to Rachel's scuffed sneakers, and she quickly turned away. Richard Hale muttered to himself, words sharp but hollow. Some PR stunt. Can't be real. But even he didn't sound convinced. His earlier bravado had drained from him, replaced by unease. Passengers shifted in their seats, eyes darting from Rachel to the helmet, then back again. Some looked curious, others ashamed, but none laughed now. Time passed differently after that. The hum of the engines returned, but the cabin never recovered its smug rhythm. Rachel sat still, fingers brushing the eagle patch on her backpack, her breathing calm. Each gesture was measured, deliberate, a quiet reminder that dignity never needed volume. When the plane leveled at cruising altitude, a younger flight attendant approached hesitantly. She held something small in her hands, a silver eagle pin. Her smile was nervous, but genuine. "This is from the crew," she said softly, offering it. For your service." The cabin hushed, all eyes watching. Rachel studied the pin for a moment, before taking it carefully, her fingers tracing the shine. She pinned it to her backpack without a word. The attendant's smile widened, relief flooding her expression, and she hurried back down the aisle. The gesture shifted something in the air. For the first time, sincerity broke through the walls of judgment. By the time the plane landed in D.C., the ripple effects of what had happened had already begun. Phones buzzed with clips uploaded to social media, Major Bennett saluting her, the Raptors forming tight against the sky, Rachel's quiet voice over the radio. The videos spread faster than the passengers could have imagined, and consequences followed. Richard Hale, once so eager to sneer, was a mid-level manager at a defense contractor. His mocking words, caught on video, circulated online. By the next morning, his LinkedIn profile was wiped clean, his company releasing a statement about conduct unbecoming. Tara Wells, the influencer with the glossy nails, discovered sponsorships vanish overnight. Her follower count plummeted. Her apology video, filled with hollow smiles, only deepened the backlash. Jessica Lange's polished image cracked when her firm quietly announced her temporary leave of absence. Olivia Hart received a formal reprimand from the airline, her career in international service reduced to short domestic flights. Ethan Carter's startup lost a key investor after his recorded comments spread. Others faced quieter but equally sharp reckonings. They had all laughed at the woman in 12F. Now the world laughed at them. Rachel saw none of it. She didn't need to. When the plane rolled to its gate, she rose calmly, helmet tucked beneath her arm, backpack slung over one shoulder. Her steps were steady, her head high. She didn't glance at the faces that had judged her. She didn't need their apologies. Their silence was enough. At the gate, a tall man waited. His presence carried the kind of authority that didn't need introduction. His eyes found Rachel instantly, softening at the sight of her. He fell into step beside her without a word. The passengers didn't need a name. They knew. James Monroe, her husband, a man with influence that stretched beyond the cabin, beyond the terminal, beyond the city. Together, they walked through the concourse. The helmet under Rachel's arm caught the fluorescent lights, the eagle pin on her backpack gleaming faintly. People parted without being told. Even strangers could feel it. There was something bigger here than a hoodie and sneakers. As they moved toward the exit, a small voice called out, "Mommy, is that the pilot lady?" Rachel turned. A little girl, no older than 10, stared wide-eyed, clutching her mother's hand. Her mother nodded quietly. "That's her." Rachel smiled, warm and genuine, dipping her head just slightly. The girl grinned back, her awe shining brighter than the airport lights. And then Rachel walked on, her husband beside her, her steps unhurried. She didn't need to look back. The story would follow her whether she wanted it or not. Because for anyone who had ever been dismissed, overlooked, or silenced, she had become a promise. Dignity needs no defense. It reveals itself when the world least expects it. If you've ever been ignored, laughed at, or told you didn't belong, this story is for you. Drop a comment below. Tell me where you're watching from. Hit like if you felt that moment when the F-22s fell into formation, and subscribe if you want more stories that remind us silence isn't weakness. Sometimes it's the loudest strength of all.